festivals and rituals and even whole theologies honoring mothers go back thousands and thousands of years. Of course they do. But the Mother's Day we celebrate in the U.S. can be traced back to some specific people and events. One of those people is the Unitarian Julia Ward Howe. Now, if you took a history class as a child in the U.S., you know her name because she wrote the words to the Battle Hymn of the Republic.
Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He hath loosed the fitful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on.
Unitarianism had a different flavor back then. That's going to be stuck in your head. But there was a lot more to Julia Ward Howe than a song. Julia, who was born into a wealthy family in 1819, spoke 6 languages, and she was a force to be reckoned with. In 1843, she married Samuel Gridley Howe, a serious man whose work she admired greatly. He was a pioneer educator of children with disabilities, but his work absolutely obsessed him. And it turned out what he really wanted was not an intelligent, independent wife, but a helper to support his work. When Julia had 2 poems published in 1848, he strongly disapproved, and this was devastating to her. She tried to remain anonymous when she then published a whole collection of her poems in 1854, but her identity was quickly revealed, and it was one of those things there was no taking it back. The book was well received in literary circles. In the New York Tribune, George Ripley called the poems a product wrung with tears and prayer from the deepest soul of the writer, and said that they formed an entirely unique class in the whole range of female literature. But they were also raw and personal. Nathaniel Hawthorne said the book seemed to let out a whole history of domestic unhappiness, and he wondered, what does her husband think of it? Her husband was furious. He cracked down on her, refusing to give her any money and threatening to take away the children if she left him. But she kept on publishing anyway. Another book of poetry, a play, articles. Later, she took up public speaking, too. In the 1850s, she became an abolitionist. In the 1860s, she helped form and became the president of the New England Woman's Suffrage Association. She stepped up to her potential and to her power. During the first 2/3 of my life, Howe said, I looked to the masculine idea of character as the only true one. I sought its inspiration, and I referred my merits and demerits to its judicial verdict. The new domain now made clear to me was that of true womanhood, woman no longer in her ancillary relation to her opposite, man, but in her direct relation to the divine plan and purpose, as a free agent, fully sharing with man every human right and every human responsibility. She continues, this discovery was like the addition of a new continent to the map of the world, or of a New Testament to the old ordinances. Julia Ward Howe helped launch the women's rights movement in several states, and although I think you might not predict it from hearing the Battle Hymn of the Republic, she became a peace activist. Mother's Day, the one that we celebrate in the US now, traces its roots back to Howe's pacifism. Wikipedia lists 55 wars involving the US that happened during Howe's lifetime, but it was the Franco-Prussian War, happening at a moment when Julia was finally comfortable owning her identity and power, that spurred her into action. Seeing that it was barbaric and could have been settled peacefully, she began organizing other women to speak out against war. In 1870, Howe wrote the Mother's Day Proclamation. And I invite you to get out your gray hymnals now and open it to reading number 573 in the back. Yes, we have the Mother's Day Proclamation of Julia Ward Howe, in our hymnals in this church. Now, she is speaking in the voice of women, but whatever gender you identify with, if you have even one X chromosome, you should join us. And that's all of us. Now, there is a typo in our hymnals. The second line should say, whether your baptism be that of water or of tears. Tears, not fears. So I'll read the plain font, and you read the italics. Arise then, women of this day. Arise. All women with hearts, whether your baptism be that of water or of tears. Say firmly, we will not have great questions decided by irrelevant agencies. Our husbands shall not come to us, reeking with carnage, or caresses and applause. Our sons shall not be taken from us to unlearn all that we have been able to teach them of charity, mercy, and patience. From the bosom of the devastated earth, a voice goes up with our own. It says, disarm, disarm. As men have often forsaken the plow and the anvil at the summons of war, let women now leave all that may be left of home for a great and earnest day of council. Let them be first as women to bewail and commemorate the dead. Let them then solemnly take counsel with each other as the means whereby the great human family can live in peace. A few years later, Howe campaigned for a Mother's Peace Day to happen each year on June 2nd. She organized Unitarian and Universalist women ministers. There were a handful of us back in the 1870s, and she herself even preached sometimes. By this time, her husband's resistance to her leadership and intellect had softened, and he even admired her and apologized. When he died in 1876, there was peace between them. Mother's Peace Day, unfortunately, though, did not stick on June 2nd. In fact, it was soon replaced by a new iteration of Mother's Day, one that was less threatening than women organizing themselves to reclaim their power from irrelevant agencies, one that did not involve women telling men how things were going to be from now on. The new Mother's Day was a tradition not of women as leaders, but more of women as caregivers. It was a woman named Anna Jarvis who started that one in the early 1900s, inspired by her grief for her mother, who had died. Although Anna's mother had been involved in the Mother's Peacemaking movement, like Julia Ward Howe, Anna had a different vision for the holiday. She envisioned Mother's Day as a personal and spiritual day, not a day for political activism. She pictured families spending time together, mothers wearing white carnations and special church services. Jarvis sought financial support for her vision from a local department store. As she held a Mother's Day celebration at a local church, thousands of people also showed up at the department store for special events there. She had no idea that that was foreshadowing of the commercialization of Mother's Day. It was Jarvis who got the holiday added to the national calendar. She noticed that national holidays seemed biased toward men and male achievement, and she went on a campaign to get people to sign petitions and write letters asking that Mother's Day be made an official national holiday. And she prevailed. In 1914, President Woodrow Wilson made it official, designating the second Sunday in May. And then it really went off the rails in Jarvis's eyes. Jarvis had engaged the help of an increasing number of florists and other businesses to promote the Mother's Day vision, but once the day had been made a U.S. holiday, that early partnership quickly devolved into a bonanza of commercialization. Jarvis was alarmed at the way card companies and florists, department stores, and other businesses capitalized on the holiday, making it seem to be more about shopping than about reverence and gratitude. 6 years, just 6 years after that measure was signed by Woodrow Wilson, Jarvis was disgusted, and she began openly speaking out against the direction that things had taken. She urged people not to buy cards and flowers and gifts. It was a lost cause, of course, but she spent the rest of her life fighting it. She threatened lawsuits. She criticized Eleanor Roosevelt for using Mother's Day to raise money for charity. And according to the historian Catherine Antolini, Jarvis even crashed a candy convention in Philadelphia to make her point. Jarvis eventually denounced the holiday altogether, and she tried to get it removed from the national calendar. Man, when you give birth, whether it is to a person or an idea, you never really know, do you? You never really know what you're bringing into the world. We nurture what is dear to us, but ultimately all that is born into its own path, and we only have so much influence. And we make miscalculations. We don't know what we don't know until we discover it with that 20/20 hindsight. Mother's Day, the way it has played out now, is a rather mixed bag. On the one hand, it's good to give thanks for sacrifices made for us by the people who have mothered us, whether we had the blessing of a loving mother in our childhood home, or whether we have received a patchwork of mothering from multiple people throughout our lives as we tried to make up for what the mother's fate delivered us to were unable to give. At the very least, each one of us arrived into this world through the process of pregnancy and birth. No small sacrifice, either of those, even in the best of circumstances, when they are a great joy. And on the other hand, this focus on sacrificial mothering casts a very narrow mold for what mothering is and what it should look like. What fits into that narrow mold? The housewife who pursues no calling or personal passion except for a life of service to her family. The mother who keeps giving and sacrificing until everything looks as it should. Clean house, perfectly behaved children, healthy meals prepared from scratch. And if things don't turn out so tidily, the implication is that she must not be giving enough to the effort. And by the way, her hair and makeup should be neatly done, but not so neatly that it looks like she actually spent much time on herself. And she should be happy all the time. You know what I mean. It's that greeting card version of Mother's Day. Hear me when I say that it's okay for mothers, and fathers too for that matter, to choose to be stay-at-home parents. I did it when my kids were little, and I loved it. But not everyone can choose it, and not everyone wants to. When you fall outside something that is lauded as an ideal, it can be very painful, especially when it comes to something as precious as the task of mothering. That commercialized, sacrificial version of Mother's Day casts a very narrow mold, and it's also pretty disempowering. How can a woman stand in her power when she's pouring out all that she is for someone else? And it makes other kinds of mothers invisible. In the commercialized Mother's Day, you can find a card that says, "Best mom ever," but not one appropriate for the mother you love who is living with mental illness or who is incarcerated. 1.2 million women are under supervision of the criminal justice system, and in state prisons, more than half, 60%, have children under 18. Mother's Day cards typically give off this air of sweetness and flowery femininity. But what about the mother who is a police officer, a pipe fitter, or a transgendered man? What about single mothers, teen mothers? And by the way, have you ever tried to find a Mother's Day card with photos of people on it who are not white people? Really? Yeah. It's gotten to the point where I walk through the aisle at the store and I go, "Oh, there's another card for white people." I may be white, but my family is not all white, and I feel weird giving them a card with people that are. Those images convey something besides Happy Mother's Day, and it's uncomfortable. That's why the Mama's Day movement is so cool. Mama's Day, was launched in 2011 by a national coalition called Strong Families. Strong Families is a big, multiracial network of leaders and groups whose mission is to make public policy catch up to the way we actually live. Meaning, we need affordable, good quality childcare because mothers actually work. We need to dismantle institutionalized racism because families are actually multiracial. We need access to the full range of reproductive health care because mothers and non-mothers alike actually need to be able to plan their lives and take care of their health. We need humane immigration policies because family members are actually born in different countries sometimes, and marriage equality because families actually can have two mothers, and transgender protections. You see. It's a holistic advocacy for what families need in order to be strong families. Our denomination, the Unitarian Universalist Association, is part of the National Strong Families Coalition. Strong Families launched the Mama's Day movement as an antidote to the commercialized Mother's Day, as an antidote to the old, too narrow mold. While Mother's Day all too often reinforces the notion that there's just one right way to be a mother or a family, the Mama's Day website, if you check it out, has e-cards portraying lots of diverse and beautiful families. And it has inspiration and tools to keep actively, intentionally shaping our society so that all families have the recognition, the rights, and the resources that they need to thrive. In our reading this morning, Sobanfu Somé says it takes a whole village not only to raise a child, but to look after the emotional health of the parents. That's what Mama's Day is about seeing each other and supporting each other so that mamas of all kinds are empowered, encouraged, and equipped to love their families and themselves. By being part of First Unitarian, you get to be part of that as well. Not only is our larger denomination involved, but once a month I sit at a table with Strong Families New Mexico Field Director Adrienne Barboa, as well as leaders from the ACLU and the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice, and we make plans to move reproductive justice forward in New Mexico. This week, the Santa Fe New Mexican published an op-ed I wrote that came out of these meetings, calling on state legislators to stop wasting time proposing anti-abortion bills that are doomed to fail, and instead focus on our budget crisis and other fixable problems that are actually hurting New Mexican families. And in this congregation, we tackle a lot of social justice issues that are part of this larger picture, including racism. In fact, you can find in your order of service today a flyer for a workshop that's coming up next Saturday, and there are still some spots available in that workshop, by Tanya Covington. She's the executive director of the nonprofit Peacemakers, and she's going to lead us in a workshop that will equip you to interrupt prejudice and be the change that you want to see. Here's something extra cool about this workshop. The Social Justice Council paid for it using funds that we all raised together at last year's Justice Auction. So the only cost for Saturday for you would be $10 for lunch. Pretty cool, right? And I happen to know that someone else who registered prepaid lunches for 2 other people. So if you hurry over to the social hall after this service, you might get one of those tickets. Just look for the table. Julia Ward Howe is long gone now. She was a woman of her time, privileged by birth from her economic status and race. Her words sound old-fashioned, and she never could have imagined what motherhood in the US would look like today. But I can't help but think that Mama's Day is much more aligned with the spirit of her Mother's Day proclamation than any greeting card I've ever seen. Mama's Day is about peacemaking in that deeply spiritual sense. We tend to think about peace as a passive situation. If nothing is happening, then we say things are peaceful. But the biblical concept of peace is much bigger than that. The word shalom means to be complete or whole and to live well. It refers to health, to right relationship with others, and to fulfillment and the absence of war. All of those things. That's the kind of peace that Mama's Day is about. If we were to write a Mama's Day proclamation for today, what might it say? Arise, women of this day. Arise, all women who have hearts, and all hearts who identify as women. Say firmly, We will not have great questions decided by irrelevant agencies, still. Our national budget shall not reek of carnage while our children receive deficient educations. We shall not be deported or incarcerated or disenfranchised while our leaders feign dismay over the lack of concerned citizens in our country. We shall not accept the falsehood that racism and misogyny are dead, while women and their loved ones continue to bear the brunt of institutionalized racism and sexism. Arise, arise and speak and act, for it is the soul's work to stand in our power, to walk in the ways of love, and to insist on a society that does right by and does not just thank mothers. Our closing hymn is in your teal hymnals. What number is it?